Hi and welcome to Magic Numbers. This is episode number 54, and finally, after a long wait, we're going to dive into the game data from DMU. Um, there's been some reasons why the data was not available, including migrations of the 17 LAN servers, and the guys were working tirelessly to get it on track, and they managed to do it. But before we go into the data, a quick word from the sponsor. MTGA Zone is helping me with supporting the stream and supporting the seminar. And you can go there, you can check your data, my data, you can check other limited content creators, you can learn stuff about Constructed. So please go there, especially go look through my articles. There are several of them. I'm pretty sure I'm going to write a couple of more pretty soon because I have one almost finished, and this episode is going to be some sort of an article itself. Because by clicking on my articles, you are showing them that actually I bring some people to the site, and that's what they, I guess, want from me. So please do that. Today, our seminar is going to look at some things that I couldn't have looked before based on only the table data that you get on the website and draft data that you can get because draft data was released earlier. Why can't I do it? Well, because I want to look at very specific questions. So, for example, I'm going to look at the kicker spells and how important it is to have the mana that allows you to cast the kicker in those spells. And we're going to look through all of those. I'm going to look a bit at domain land bases and try to figure out what's going in the data there. And what is quite important, we're going to look at the new approach to the 17 lands data that has changed since the first thing, because there's some new features, and these are features that protect the purity of the data. They have been introduced after long discussions, mainly between me and Viral Misnomer, the head of the 17 lands, as we did not completely agree on what to do. But in the end, I think we came with a brilliant compromise that allows to have the data pure, but at the same time, don't lose any information that could have been lost in the different approach to the data. So without further ado, the preamble is keep your metrics clean. So the problem with data, it's that sometimes it's very arbitrary, and it's a whole art to keep your metrics clean and not to introduce biases to them. To give you example, I do a removal guide every single format, and every single format I have a problem in quantifying the number of creatures that a spell can kill, because if I have a creature that has X in the toughness, how do I treat it? If I have a spell that makes multiple 1/1s, how do I treat them? There's always choices I have to make, and usually I make them in a pragmatic way. But I do know that I sacrifice some purity. If I made like very rigid rules on how I quantify the number of creatures killed by removal in each set, I might have had a clean metric and it would be uniform across the formats. I don't do that because, again, I'm a very pragmatic person. But if you're operating a data collection website, you have to be much more uniform in how you treat everything, because all your website has to be based on the same kind of calculations. I can afford myself a bit of speculation and a bit of context because I do my analyses from scratch every single time. If you have a scraping website that looks for the data, that collects, that gathers it, you will not change your algorithms every single time a new set is released because there are a couple of cards in it. And that was a problem in Dominaria. And someone who observed it was someone that actually reads the description of all the metrics in 17 lands, unlike me. I'm just when you work with some things, you don't read the instructions anymore, and that's maybe not the best of the traits. But I did notice at some stage that all cards in DMU are drawn roughly 40 to 50% of the time in a game. And I noticed that there were cards that were massively exceptions from this rule, and that they had certain sets of properties: Blight Pie, Color Colony, Rona's Vortex, Shield Wall Sentinel, and Wingmantle Chaplain. I looked at this data and I instantly knew, okay, this is because of tutoring effects. You draw them more frequently because Wingmantle Chaplain, you will not only draw it naturally, but you will also draw it using the Shield Wall Sentinel quite frequently. So I observed it. I wrote a Twitter thread about it. But then someone came to the 17 Lens Discord and said, but your description of the data says that you don't count tutoring effects as a draw. So why does this count as a draw in your metrics? And how does it change? And that's where our discussion started. We had it whether we should count the Wingmantle Chaplains being tutored up as a draw, or we should treat it differently as a not draw. Now, you can see that there's positives of both approaches. If we count Wingmantle Chaplain being tutored as well as drawn, we count all the instances it appears in the hand. But at the same time, this sort of brings us closer to looking at the win rate of the card, not only when it's naturally drawn, but also when it's tutored, so when you choose to draw it. And of course, you choose to draw a card usually when you can cast it. So this biases it into another metric that we never used on 70 Lens, which is win rate when cast. And of course, at 20 mana spell that says win the game is going to have a very high win rate when cast. The problem, it's not going to be cast very frequently. Now, if you can tutor it whenever you want it, and that was the problem with the lessons in Strixhaven, the win rates are going to be very high because you choose to bring this card to your hand because you know that you can cast it, and therefore the win rate is going to be pretty high. That was the thing with the mascot exhibition, which had amazing win rate because you could choose when you have it in your hand, and if you didn't want it, you just decided not to choose it because that card was tutored up roughly 100% of the time. Wingmantle Chaplain is clearly not tutored up 100% of the time because it would be naturally drawn probably like 40 to 50% of the time. So that's all fine. But there's still like a large chunk of the numbers of the games where the card is being tutored up. So how do you treat it? And in the end, I didn't. I helped having discussion that led to that decision. But Viral Misnomer decided we are going to exclude tutored cards from the games in hand data in general. So basically, they will not be counted as cards that were drawn. And this, of course, brings up a whole new problem. Like, how do you count those games now? And the decision has been made that the tutored cards are going to be in a special category called tutored cards, which solves a lot of problems that could have been generated by ignoring the problem. So first of all, games drawn and games in hand statistics are not going to take the tutor card into account. The games not drawn statistics when card was not drawn is slightly changed now, and it's now called games not seen. And it means now that it only takes into account games where the card has not been seen by the player that played that particular game. So it counts tutoring as seeing the card, and it counts drawing as drawing a card. So it's going to be the same. And because of those changes, you can still come up with all the other old metrics. So that's all fine. So we actually have more data, more interesting data, and at least we have a clear-cut definitions of what's going on. But this is not everything, because what is tutoring really? So there's obvious cases like Shieldwood Sentinel that clearly tutors a wall. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a creature card with Defender, reveal it, and put it in your hand, and then shuffle. Micromancer, the same, tutors a one-drop spell. And Sparking Goblin tutors a land. So these are very clear-cut cases, and that's all fine. The problem starts when you look at the special cases, because Flurryfiller's Vine Wall tutors a card that is in the top 6 cards of your library. 6 cards is quite a lot. It's like a large chunk of the library. So if you look at a tutor effect that looks at 20 cards in the library, all of them, and tutor something and count it as a tutor, how should you count Floriferous Vinewall that looks at 6 cards? How you should treat Impulse that looks only at 4 cards, or how you should look at Talas Lookout's Death Trigger, which looks at top 2 cards. And in the end, the decision has been made that all of those effects are going to be counted now as tutors. So they will not be counted as drawing a card, because it doesn't say draw a card on any of them. It says put it in your hand, very much like on the tutor effects that will be put in your hand. So the new data and 17 lands, you can look at the announcement on the Discord of the 17 lands to see all the details. But generally, all the effects that put things in the hand based on selection are going to be counted as tutors, and they will have a separate category into them, which hopefully in the future is going to make the data more interesting to interpret. And already now we can look at some data. So without further ado, let's move to the data. I took the data from 17lens.com. In order to retain any kind of like level of sanity, I looked at 100,000 games from Premier Draft, because this is just the initial look at the data set. The data set itself is bigger. I just selected like 100,000 games from relatively recent drafts to look at the current metagame more. So first statistic for the day. Which cards are most tutored? And let's take my laser counter. Tutoring frequency is a metric that I had to introduce for that purpose. And it means how many times was the card tutored in relation to the number of the games it was played. So Wingmantle Chaplain having this number at 25% means that in a quarter of the games where Wingmantle Chaplain was in the deck, it has been tutored up by Shieldwall Sentinel or other effects, because of course sometimes it might have been tutored up by Impulse or something. This is a large number. A card, as I said, will be drawn in roughly 45% of the games. So a good third of all the times that people saw Wingmantle Chaplain in their hand, it was because it was tutored in one way or another. And as you can see, this is the sort of testament to question from Barcie Boss. Yeah, this is the problem when you have to make a clear-cut decisions. If Impulse had look at the top 4 cards, put 3 on the bottom, draw a card, it would count as a card drawn. It's weird, I know, but that's how it works. So yeah, that's the thing. In the end, decisions need to be made on how to make things, and I think having uniform rules is fine, especially that in the end I will be able to jump over those kinds of things, and also I will be able to get more information out of it, not less. So in the end, we're gaining some subtle differences that can be aggregated very easily, and we're getting access to information that was not available before, which makes it even better than it was. Right, where was I? Yeah, so Wingmantle Chaplain was clearly the card that was the most tutored thing in the format by a large difference. 25% of the time it was seen, it was thanks to tutoring. Second on the list is Shieldwall Sentinel, and that's been 15% of the time tutored, which sort of is surprising because it is a tutor itself. So it seems like people chaining Sentinel of a Sentinel is something that happened quite frequently. And then we have a package of Coral Colony and Walking Bulwark with around 8% of the time that they were tutored. And just a bit behind 7.4 is a Blight Pile. A bit behind 5.2%, there is a Clockwork Drawbridge. And I think that this is Gibbering Barricade. 3% of the time was it was seen was tutored. And I think with Gibbering Barricade, the reason is that the card was played very frequently in the non-wall decks as a sort of control kind of card, which means that because it was played in the non-wall decks, it was frequently played in the decks without the Shieldwell Sentinel, and the tutoring rate is slightly lower. While Wingmetal Chaplain, you always wanted to have your Shieldwell Sentinels in the deck with Wingmetal Chaplain. Coral Colony is also something that you were more likely to play in the deck with Walls, and Walking Bulwark the same. So Gibbering Barricade had the lowest tutor rate. Only wall that had a lower tutor rate was the Floriferous Vine Wall, which probably was played most of the time in the non-wall decks, actually, because most wall decks were in the Esper wedge, and this one was played in domain decks that had a more controlling tint. And the 05 wall that loots when you play an instant also was probably played in the normal decks more frequently. That's why it didn't make the list. So bulk of the cards on the most tutored group are walls, but they are by far not the only ones that have that property. When we go back to the one of the highest cards on the list, we have Rona's Vortex at 7.7% tutoring rate, which means 45% probably roughly it was drawn naturally, and on top of that plus 7.7% it was tutored. And Runa's Vortex obviously was not fetched by Shieldwell Sentinel. It was thanks to Micromancer, the 3/3 that can put a 1-mana instant or sorcery in your hand. And there's a bunch of other spells that were most likely tutored up by the Micromancer. We have Shore Up with around 6% of the time that it was tutored up. Timely Interference around 5%. Tail Swipe, Urborg Repossessions around 4%. Runic Shot 3.5%. Cut Down 3.5%. Flowstone Infusion 3%ish. So yeah, these are the cards that that benefited from Micromancer the most, or were most likely to be found in decks that also contain Micromancer. Now, obviously, Micromancer is a blue creature, and that's why we see Rona's Vortex, Shore Up, and Timely Interference as the top 1-mana spells that it tutored up, because, of course, the chance of another blue spells being in the deck with a blue creature is the highest. And that's why some of those cards I already see in the chat that that ask about Urborg Repossession. Urborg Repossession is going to be in many decks that don't have a Micromancer, because they will be in decks that are not blue, and therefore the number is going to be lower. I could probably calculate the percentage of the time that each of those cards is with its tutors, and then figure it out. Now, the chat already can see it, but of course we also release it in the podcast version. There is a couple of cards that don't fit to any of those categories for the obvious tutors, and one of them is Solkanar the Tainted, Silverback Elder, Tatiova Steward of Tides, and Joda the Unifier. I think that these cards will be tutored up actually quite frequently. So Solkanar is like around 4%. And it was a number that sort of surprised me, because there is nothing that will bring Solkanar to my hand from the library that much straightforward. So it must be that it's a combination of multiple things. And I think that the chat was quite quick to observe that it might be the black spell that looks at top 5 cards, I think. Cruelty of Gigs is another option to do that. Impulse is another option to do that. And I'm still not 100% sure if Urberg repossession after milling something will count as tutoring. So so yeah, people also mentioned that Lagomos is, but probably Lagomos tutoring happened a handful of times in history. I'm just checking the wording on the card before I make a fool of myself. Yes. So Shadow Prophecy is probably going to be the most likely target of a spell that will tutor up Joda and Solkanar, because it does look through many cards. It will be played in those domain decks, and it will definitely, if you have a choice of getting Joda or Solkanar in those decks, you are going to do that. Plus, there is also a couple of other effects, like maybe in the domain deck, the 2/4 flyer that tutors up cards. Oh no, that one actually draws. Ha ha ha! I fooled myself. I still don't know how Eerie Soul Tender is working with self mill and then getting Urberg repossession, or Eerie Soul Tender itself bringing a card to hand. I don't know exactly if that's treated as a tutored one or as a or some other way. That's a thing on the list to actually inspect how it works. But okay, this is enough about tutored cards. Right, so before I switch to the data, before you start reading the data, the question that was bothering me since the release of the format, even, or actually before the release of the format, I had that analysis planned before the format was even released, when we started to know the spoiler and we learned that the kicker spells are multicolored, or at least that the kicker cost is in the other color than the color of the actual spell was. Which spells will be absolutely necessary to play the kicker, which spells it will be sort of meh, it doesn't really matter, and which spells actually the kicker is going to be a sort of trap, because I'm sure that there are spells like that. And finally, with the dataset that was released, I can answer that question, and then we're going to look at it and maybe speculate about some of the cards as we do it. So first of all, the graphs I'm showing is the win rates of each card by the number of sources for kicker mana in the deck, and there will be decks with 0 sources for kicker, so basically where it's impossible to play the card with the kicker. 1 to 3 when the kicker is sort of splashed and occasionally will appear, or over 3, which means probably that we're talking about the deck that is in the 2 colors, where both colors are the main color of the card and the main color of the kicker. I only looked at the common and uncommon ones because the rare ones are problematic to analyze this way, because there is more questions to answer through that. So I focused, and anyway, we play commons and uncommons more frequently. So I divided them into sort of 5 different categories. The first one is when being able to play the kicker cost is absolutely essential for the win rate of the particular card. So the cards that have biggest differences, first of all, Pixie Illusionist. Not a single person, not a single game was played with Pixie Illusionist in the dataset that I analyzed where it was impossible to cast the kicker cost for it. So weirdly, Pixie Illusionist is a green card because it was always played in green decks. Strange, but true. And then the win rate, when you have ability to play the kicker, it was not really very much different. Springbok, they might have been, but I took only a selection of the games. I just picked the sort of random 100,000 games to make my analysis easier to do without like overcharging my computer because I wanted everything to work smoothly. So probably none of your games were caught there because of that. So that's a weird one, and basically we don't know. Maybe Pixie Illusionist can work as a blue-red tempo card in your deck with curiosities or something. There is under the one in a green exile target artifact or enchantment, and with a kicker, it can exile any permanent. Now, obviously, exiling any permanent is way better than exiling instant enchantment, and you can see that in the data. The win rate was 38%. If you couldn't kick it, there were not that many games that were in this category, but some people managed to play Terrace Under as basically enchantment and as basically a green disenchant. And this goes up by far. If you had 1 to 3 sources of black in your deck, it had 54% win rate, and 56.3 if you had access to more than 3 black sources in your deck. So this is a big difference, and this is absolutely unsurprising. We have the same with Elvish Hydromancer. No one wants to play a vanilla 3/2 for 3 mana, it seems. And the win rate, if you played it as a vanilla 3/2, was only 42%. It went up to around 44.5% when you added more sources of blue. And it didn't really matter if there were many of them or just a few. Colossal Growth, another card that you want to be able to kick it. 2 mana +3/+3, not a powerful card. 3 mana +4/+4, and trample. And it seems that the trample on that is just so important. It was literally what made this card being useful. The difference between not being able to kick it, 48% win rate, being able to kick it, 55-56% win rate. So a big difference there between those two. Another Strength of the Coalition, that's the other combat trick, 1 mana +2/+2, but if you kick it, put the +1/+1 counter on every of your creatures. Here the kicker effect is just so much more powerful than the effect of the actual spell that you see a big difference. Shielded Restoration, few people remember, but this card has a kicker. Normally for 4 mana it's a reanimate spell that makes you lose life. If you pay the kicker, you gain life instead of losing life. So a big swing in life. And Shielded Restoration has a pattern that shows you that it probably is at its best in black-white decks. And when I'm saying at its best, I mean it's playable. Or maybe not even black white decks, but decks that have Wingmantle Chaplain, because probably that's the kind of a card that you would like to reanimate using Shielded Restoration. So Shielded Restoration, if you don't have a source of white, 42% win rate, not really good. Goes up to 49 when you have a couple of white sources, 1 to 3, and 54% win rate when you have more than 3. Now keep in mind, this is a win rate in games played. I took it because it would be even further complicated if we just looked at the games drawn with the now tutoring that needs to be taken into account. So I didn't for the time being. And of course, game played win rate is slightly lower than game in hand win rate. So if they seem low to you, it's because it's a different metric that we're looking at. Another card that is in this category where you definitely want to be able to kick it, Yavimaya Iconoclast, 50% win rate as a 3/2 trampler for 2 mana, and then 56-57% if you are able to kick it. Slight suggestion that you might want to be able to kick it, because there is a difference between having 1 to 3 sources and having over 3 sources. And a card that definitely looks like something that needs to be in the 2-color deck with both colors present. Keldon Strike Team. In red decks that cannot kick it, 51% win rate, nothing impressive. But it goes up to 56 and 58 if you have 1 to 3 sources or over 3 sources. So These are basically the cards that you want to be able to kick, and some of them you not only want to kick them, but you also want to play them in a dedicated two-color deck that is in the colors of the card and its kicker. Then the second group is cards where the difference between not having any source or having few sources is very small. And again, here we're going to see slightly different patterns. Like the first card, Phyrexian Warhorse, it has 52% win rate if you can't kick it. So if you just put it as a black card, as maybe a sacrifice outlet of some sorts. 53.2% win rate. Notice that there are different scales here because of the unfortunate zero in the previous slide. Oh, wait. Oh, wow. I jumped over this. Okay, let's go back. Cards that have a medium difference between having 0 sources and 1 to 3 sources. So Balduvian Atrocity, around 49% win rate if you can't kick it, and it goes up to 53 and 54 if you can kick it. So slight difference. You want to be able to kick it. The 1 mana for unearthing something is relatively useful for that card. Sorry, Springbok. For fires, you mean? Oh, fires are probably on the next. Yeah. We'll talk about when we get to the fires. Urborg Repossession, 53% when you just play it as a 1 black mana, gain 2 life and raise dead. It goes up to 57, 56% when you have some sources of green. Actually, it looks like it's slightly better as a slight splash of the green. You don't want to be overly green in those decks. You just want to have access to a couple of sources of green. Vineshaper Prodigy. Now, this is a card that you definitely want to kick. 52% win rate as a vanilla 2/2. Probably G-Guards. And then 55, 56% if you are able to kick it and get the... actually, another tutoring effect from Vineshaper Prodigy, looking at top 3 cards and then putting one in your hand. Slight indication that you want to be heavier on the blue side to be able to kick it more reliably. Bog Badger. This card looks 53% win rate as the vanilla 3/3. If you are able to kick it sometimes, it's 56% win rate. So there is a decent change in the percentage. It drops off again in the dedicated black green deck. Probably you want to have some black to be able to kick it, but yeah. Isn't a 2% difference already a really big deal? It's a deal. It's probably not like a massive deal because there is some variance always. So I'm pretty cautious in looking at those differences. I'm observing them, but I'm not getting like too preachy about that kind of difference. I want to see bigger differences to say something with more conviction. But 2% is a strong suggestion that there is a difference there. Okay. Next card, Battlewing Mystic. That's the 2/1 flyer that for a kicker discards a hand and draws you 2 cards. You want to be able to splash it at some amount of time, because there is a 2 percentage point difference between the win rate if you can't kick it and if you can. But it still has a pretty decent win rate when you can't kick it. So this is a card that you can probably play without being able to kick it, but you want to have that access if possible. Choking Miasma, there's also 53% win rate if you can't kick it, around 55% win rate if you can. And Cleaving Skyrider, now this is probably as clear as you can get. 53.5% win rate if you can't kick it and you play it as a flash vanilla 2/2 flyer, French vanilla. And it goes up to 55 when you have 1 to 3 sources of red, and 57.5 when you have over 3 sources of red. So this is a card you want to be playing in the dedicated white-red deck. And it's the same with the Keldon Strike team that we saw on the slide before. So basically, you have a decent indication through those two cards that red white is a coherent color. And I think that this is one of the reasons why red white is the highest winning archetype in this format, because it is really the only super coherent color combination. And if you find it open, you get into it and you get a good deck, because everything in there sort of works well together. So here we have cards with the smaller differences between not being able to splash and splashing slightly, which doesn't mean that it's not beneficial to have a lot of it. So first card that we're looking is the Phyrexian Workhorse, 52% win rate if you can't kick it, 53.2 if you can. So small difference. But you get a 56% win rate when you have over 3 sources of white to kick it. So Phyrexian Warhorse, from the data, looks like it's pretty convincingly a black-white card, and you want to play it in black-white decks. So yeah, probably you should avoid playing it if you are not in dedicated black-white deck generally. Fires of Victory, if you can't kick it, 57% win rate. That's a high win rate, so you don't have to worry about it at all. It goes up to 58 roughly when you can kick it. So it's slightly better if you can kick it, but you don't have to. It's still good. It's still better than most cards from the previous slides would be at the peak of their performance. So yeah. Aggressive Sabotage, on the other hand, it's pretty poor wherever you look, 52%. If you can't kick it, 53 if you have a splash kicker, and 52 again if you can kick it reliably. So kicking doesn't give you any benefits. And playing black-red is also probably like a hindrance. Similar situation in Troll to the Pit. 53.5% win rate in average deck, so slightly better card than Aggressive Sabotage, or red is the slightly better color. Then it increases to 54.5 if you can splash kick it, and drops down to 53 if you're playing red black. So basically, red black as a steel and sack deck doesn't work in this format, it seems. Harloon Battle Hymn, it has 57.5% win rate across board. You don't need the kicker. It gives you maybe a small bonus, but not really that much. The card is good wherever you play it, so just pick it and play it whenever you want. Mr. Larry Chonka. So it seems to indicate the card's synergy with the color pair it falls into versus general utility. It sort of looks at several things at the same time. It shows the synergy within the color. So basically, I think that the steepness of the line between those three categories is the synergy within the color combination. Because if it has a low win rate when you can't kick it, and medium win rate when you can kick it but you're only splashing, and very high win rate when you can kick it reliably, that shows that this is synergistic in a color pair, in two color decks most likely, maybe two colors with a splash. But it also shows you the utility. So this is the slope I'm talking about, because the laser pointer was not working, for example. But if you go back a bit, it can also show you the usefulness of the kicker. Now, the difference in Terra Sander between not being able to kick it and being able to kick it is just massive. Keep in mind that this scale starts from 0 and goes to 70%, and these scales go to from 48 to 59. So they cover only a fraction of it. So the difference between not being able to kick Terra Sander and being able to kick Terra Sander are literally bigger than the scale on this graph. So it's absolutely massive. So these ones definitely show you that you have to be able to kick them to play them. And in case of Children's Restoration and Calendar Strike Team, it also suggests that you probably want to play a two-color deck that can utilize it the best. I hope that helps you, Larry. Omnat Nods, yes, it probably would be slightly better to look at the game in hand win rate. But because of the changes of the tutoring and everything, I didn't have time to look at it properly because it would require extra steps for me to get that analysis going, basically. I might do it for the article for the MTGA zone when I will look at the kicker card statistics. Okay, so where we are, Phyrex and Missionary is the same case as Harloon Battle Hymn. 58% if you can't kick it, 58, 57% win rate if you can kick it. I'm pretty sure that in this case, it's good to kick it, but it's also good to play it in the white-red deck without being able to kick it. And I think that this is the situation that we're looking at, and that's why you have those differences. You also have some kind of interference of the general strength of the decks. Runic Shot, very mild suggestion that you might want to kick it, but 55% if you can't kick it, 55.5% if you can kick it. So it's a very mild indication. I wouldn't put too much weight on it. So in general, a decent card, not a great one, but a decent card in Runic Shot, and kicker is optional. Now we look at the cards that have slightly higher win rate when you can't kick it. And this tells me that those cards are good enough on what they are doing, but not necessarily great in the color combinations that the kicker is. So let's look at the example. Phyrexian Espionage, you want to use it in decks that don't necessarily have the black. You just want the raw card drawing power. And it's seen. Maybe it's okay to have a small splash of black in those decks, but if you have more like strictly blue-black decks, the win rate slightly drops. So we have 57% win rate if you can't kick it, and 56.6 if you can kick it reliably. So there you go. Rona's Vortex, same. You don't need to be kicking it. I think you don't need to be reliably kicking it, so you don't need to play like a blue-black deck. You want to be able to kick it sometimes. It's basically even on the win rate. If you can't kick it, 58.5% win rate. If you can kick it, it's 58.5% win rate, the same, basically. And if you can kick it reliably, 57.7. So this card is roughly even. Now, of course, the sample sizes will not be necessarily equal. Rona's Vortex played without the kicking possibility is probably going to be mainly in some kind of tempo blue-red decks that have also micromancers that allow for fetching it, but you didn't get the splash sources, but you still think that bouncing something is going to be pretty strong for 1 mana because you're playing a tempo game, and that's why the win rate is so high. I'm not saying that you should reliably put Rona's Vortex in decks that can't kick it. I would probably think that 95% of the games it should be played in decks that can be kicked. And I can quickly check my magic data tab somewhere else. Oh, this is domain. That's a different thing. I'm just going to see what is how often do people play Rona's Vortex without being able to kick it. Rona's Vortex, where is it? Come on, there we go. Yeah, it's not very frequently. It will be probably like 5 to 10% of the time, more in the range of 5, I think, when they cannot kick it. So there is a big disproportion there how people are playing it, and it will be the same for several of those cards actually. Yeah, Rona's Vortex in Mercurio. Rona's Vortex in response to a combat trick is my. It killed me several times. Let's put it like that. Then we have a weird one by Shino Branch Rider. It has a pretty decent win rate when you can't kick it as a 1/1 haste creature that just pumps up for mana. I guess it's some ultra aggressive strategies that are based on red. You know, $5 gazers and cheap creatures. That might do the trick. And then it drops because probably there's a larger sample size when you can kick it, and that sort of lowers it because here you have some variance coming in. I wouldn't put much trust in those results. I think that the card is just medium, however you play it. Monstrous Warleech. Here we don't have a difference between not being able to kick it and being able to kick it rarely, but there is a big increase in win rate. So those two were 52% win rate. There is a 55% win rate when you can splash it, kick it reliably. And that tells me that this is a card that wants to be played in black blue decks that can do their thing, their build arounds, and then the card can have a pretty decent win rate. I think that the 54% win rate, knowing the propensity of Magic players to play those kinds of cards when they shouldn't, I think that 55% win rate suggests that there is a build around that uses the card well. But it needs to be designed, crafted with care, and you have to think about how you want to play this kind of card. Warhost Frenzy, this is a strange one. 58% win rate if you can't kick it. 57.1 when you can kick it very rarely, and 53% win rate only when you can kick it frequently. What this tells me is that this card probably is a card that has best results when you play it in red decks, red aggressive decks. I don't know if it's going to be red green or maybe it's going to be red blue, but it's definitely not going to be red black. And I assume that these two categories, when you can't kick it and when you can kick it very rarely, are fringe cases that don't happen that often. I can confirm it quickly. Warhost Frenzy, yeah, you can roughly 10% play it without the kicker, and with being able to kick it only several times, this goes up to maybe 30% of the games that are played with the card. So yeah, Warhost Frenzy, probably not good in red black decks. That's the thing with it. Oh yeah, it's also Boros, Poopy Pirates and Mercurio. You're absolutely right. I mean, the card has some spots because I think that it also can be easily played in some spells deck as a finisher. In the aggressive tinted version of it, that doesn't work very well. Okay. Tribute to Urborg. That's also weird that it has higher win rate as a non-splashable card. Here, I think it's a data artifact that is based on sample sizes. Vast majority, but I mean, I'm talking like ultra vast majority of the games. It's being splashed for the kicker, and probably that's why you have like 20,000 games with Urborg. Tribute to Urborg in the data set, and only 2,000 of them are played when you can't splash it. I guess that people play it without being able to splash when it fulfills a very particular Poopy Pirates is asking a very good question. Do you think this visualization would improve with the third dimension for the size of population? No, I think not, because generally adding dimensions to the data visualization makes them complicated to read. And it is a problem. It would add subtlety, and it would be better for people who are very comfortable with looking at data, but it will confuse people who are not. And I usually err on the side of showing less complicated graphs, but easier to read, and try to explain the subtleties behind them as I go through the data. So that's my point of view on this kind of stuff. Um, And we have the similar situation with Talarian Gazer. I think Talarian Gazer is good in any deck. It has high win rates, like of 57% in any category. Slightly higher when you can't kick it, because maybe the decks again, like blue red, can utilize it very in a very powerful way, or maybe blue black can utilize it in a very powerful way, and you don't need the kicker. It's literally, in this case, it's just a kicker. It adds something. If you can play it, that's fine, but it doesn't give you like a massive benefit. And here we have another weird card, a card that actually the more likely you're going to kick it, the worse it performs, and that's G2 Amplifier. Come on, fat fingers, don't click the things. 57% win rate if you can't kick it, drops to 56 if you can kick it slightly, and down to 55 if you can kick it reliably when you have over 3 sources. Now, this is most likely the result of that fact that the card is so good in red green. Yeah, Barcia Boss, that's exactly what I think it is. It's just so much better when you can play a random Gaia's Might on it than if you play it in the blue blue red deck and try to play it as a tempo card. Because if you play combat trick decks, G2 Amplifier becomes a must block. You have your combat tricks that will make it big anyway, independent if it's block or not. So it can lead to some explosive situations quite easily. And I think that also quite a lot of people playing red green are sleeping on this particular card because they look at the kicker color and they think, oh, that's not something for me. But the best of the players have identified that G2 Amplifier is a good card in red green, and that will further boost the win rate in those color pairs. And here we have cards that somehow behave the worst in the if you can kick them by quite a large margin. Timely interference, much better if you can't kick it. 57 to 55, 56%, so like 1.5% difference. Shalai's Acolyte, 56.6 if you can't kick it, and then 55 if you can. This card just doesn't seem to be doing anything that the white green wants to be doing, so that's probably the reason for that. Protect the Negotiators is weird because it has a decent win rate if you can't kick it, 55.5. Really bad at 54 if you can kick it ever so slightly once in a while, and a massive 58% win rate if you can kick it reliably. Now, again, it's played very rarely. Very rarely it's played when you can't kick it. So that might be the reason that there is a variance in this particular data set. And most frequently it's played when you can kick it reliably. I think it's a card that should be almost exclusively played in blue-white. And there may be some weird go white blue decks that don't have white where it's going to be actually fine. There is, yes, there is so Jesus is asking do you think that these 1-2 percentage point differences on this chart are just noise or just differences in deck baseline win rates? I would say both. I think differences in deck baseline win rates is a part of the noise to me. And there's magic data is generally very dirty, and there's so much that you have to always take into account when you look at those data. And yeah, I think that a large chunk of it is just going to be insignificant differences, but it's still worth observing them and at least keeping in mind the fact that they exist, and then basically looking at the sample sizes. If something seems strange, it can be explained by the fact that the sample size is small. If something seems counterintuitive, you mark it, maybe look at different data set and try to reconfirm it. Yes, not nudes. These graphs will reflect the color combinations a bit more because they use a game played win rate. As I said, combining three different metrics of a card draw is going to be complicated, at least in the beginning, and I just did not have time to go through all the shebang to look through them. Because yeah, it's already getting all the numbers in terms of how many sources in the deck are there is usually complicated because you have to take into account all the five color lands, all the grottos, all the mana and rocks and stuff like that. So yeah, it is a fun analysis, obviously. Um, Another card. Then we have three cards that have like literally a drop in win rate based on being able to kick it. It's Joint Exploration, Juniper Order, Rootweaver, and Banalish Sleeper. And honestly, I think Banalish Sleeper is just better in white red as a 3/1 vanilla, and probably not so important in most of the black white decks where they say black red. I mean white. Yeah, I mean white red. It's just not so good in most of the black white decks. There is a home for it, I'm pretty sure, in the black white decks when you go a bit more aggressive and white. But the issue with that is that people will play it also in the decks where it's not going to be so great. Juniper Order, Rootweaver, no explanation. I'm just guessing that the sample size when you play it as a vanilla 2/2 is very, very small. And indeed, I am correct. It's going to be like 5% of the game, so we can probably discard this as an artifact. But these sample sizes are quite big, so it's probably good as a sort of like a splash of green in a white deck than a fully dedicated green white deck. And Joint Exploration, here we might fall into a different trap that it actually is played relatively frequently without being able to kick it, and then it's played as an instant in sort of Tolarian Terror decks or in tempo decks with electrostatic infantry, and that's why it's so much better, because these decks are just slightly better. Heroic Charge, there's not much differences there, but there are some. It seems like kicking is not necessary for that. You just want to have multiple creatures, basically. Sprouting Goblin, weirdly, not kicking it seems to be okay, but it just happens very rarely that people play it when they cannot kick it. So probably that's the reason for that. They play it when they really need a 2-drop that has some late game ability to do something useful. Scout the Wilderness. Again, better results when you can't kick it based on very, very tiny sample size. Like 1% of the games people couldn't kick it. Because, of course, when you're looking for lands, you probably want to have domain 5, so you will always be able to kick it. So weird deck that probably is based on 5 drops of some sort that needed the 3 mana way to ramp themselves to 5 mana. Is probably why it has a good win rate, and it has a pretty bad win rate if you can kick it. So probably card is just bad. And Stall for Time also has a much higher win rate when you can't kick it than when you can kick it. And here there is like a solid number of decks that do play it when it can't be kicked. Around 10% of the games are in those situations, and it's probably white-red decks that want something to push the attacks through. So they use it as a sort of falter kind of effect. So that's the ratings of the kickers. Without going into the numbers, generally nice to know that these are the cards that you really want to kick and have the capacity of being able to kick them. So are these cards, and then memorize some of the cards that have those steep kind of gradients are the ones when there might be some interesting ramifications for playing them mainly in their 2-color combination decks, like the one Monstrous War Leech and the Phyrexian Warhorse. Cleaving Skyrider, Vine Shaper Prodigy, and Keldon Strike Team, Shield Restoration. These are the sort of cards that you probably want to play more in your 2-color combinations. I think so, and I think that Springbok says seems like lands that provide free kicker sources are important. I think so, and in general, I think 17 lens users are pretty good in figuring out how to make sure that they have a couple of those splashed lands, and you can see that in the sheer volume of the games when you are capable of splashing your kicker color. Just trying to find Harloon Battle Hymn. You actually lots of games were played when you can't kick it and it was still a high win rate. So, for example, in this card, kicking doesn't seem like an important part. To hide this. Let's go. So one thing I tested also was the link between number of instants and sorceries and the Tolarian Terror win rate in terms of game played win rate in this case. And there is noise, and this sort of probably shows you what levels of noise are you dealing with the data. But I do think that there is a sort of optimum around 10, 11 instant sorceries when that's where you want to be with your Tolarian Terror. You definitely don't want to go below 6 because if you go further than that, I did cut off because of the small sample sizes. You see really bad win rates. So I would say 8, preferably 10 to 11 instants and sorceries if you want to play Tolarian Terrors. But then decks that have too many instants and sorceries in this format are probably have too much fluff, because lots of those instants and sorceries are going to be 1 mana cantrips or things like that. So you don't want to exaggerate with the number of instant sorceries. Have a decent amount of threats as well. So that's probably what you want to do, like 13 threats, 11 spells, that kind of stuff, to make your Tolarian Terror decks click. And the last part of the analysis I did is looking at domain decks and how important it is to have redundant sources of your lowest basic land count. So basically what you see, basic lands, what you see in these tables, and I'm not going to go through all the cards, just showing the general trends, is you see the win rate with decks that don't have all 5 colors, and the other 4 have all 5 colors sources, basic sources in them, but the lowest number is 1, 2, 3, or 4. So basically, if it's 1, then you have all 5 colors, and let's say you only have 1 swamp or 1 mountain, or 1 swamp and 1 mountain. I don't count how many of them have one source. So it's like only added that occasionally you'll get the domain 5. If you have 2, you will have all 5 colors, and your lowest count of the basics is going to be, say, plains, and you're going to have 2 of them in your deck. And here it's the same with 3 and the same with 4. Majority of the 5 color decks are in this category. This category is usually pretty big, and you can look at some cards, and general pattern in those is having all 5 colors is a benefit for having a slightly higher win rate, even if it's only 1 basic of the last color combination. So we see that the average win rate for those cards is slightly higher. You can see by the coloring is slightly higher when you have at least 1 source of that 5th color. That's what you want to do. And there are some cards that also have a decent win rate when you don't have a full domain, and one of those is Drag to the Bottom. Possibly because this card will need a double black, so you might want to play it in maybe like a 3-color more dedicated deck when you just play it as a 4 mana -4/-4 spell, but more reliably. And the same goes with Leyland Binding. It's also okay when you don't have the full domain, because the card is just very powerful for what it does. So this is one half. The peak win rate for those cards will be around 1 or 2 basics of your lowest color and 5 types of basics present. Some of those 66% win rates and 47% win rates, these sample sizes for the Radas Firebrand are petite in this, if I remember correctly. Um, and this is the second half of it, so that you kept sanity and not watch too long a table at the same as in the same situation. But you see, it's very similar trend. The win rates when you have at least one or two basics of the lowest basic denomination is much higher than when you have 3-4, because when you have 3-4, you probably sacrifice so many picks for lands that you lack the power in your deck, or maybe it's a bit random what you're going to be able to cast, and you have like sort of lands and spells are very much A to B dynamics in those decks, and not having all 5 colors is not really beneficial when you're playing your domain cards, because you want that extra bonus from the domain. One thing that surprised me is the Sphinx of the Clear Skies. I thought that it will be better in the decks that have less than 5 colors, because I had a very bad experience with that card in my domain deck when I was playing it, and it was basically not able to attack because every attack would have killed me unless I killed the opponent, because I would mill myself because it draws so many cards. Well, so Domino Man says, that's how I feel about Nile. I was talking about this with the Isaiah last night, but I don't really need Nile to be domain 5. Domain 5, it only draws 1 card, but the Sphinx with domain 5 draws 5 cards. You really don't have time to attack with it. So the difference between the speed of the clock, in the situation when I couldn't attack with my Sphinx, I would have gladly attacked with my Nile, because I had like 12 cards in my deck. So I would have probably gotten there by picking my most powerful cards from the top. But with Sphinx, I attack once, I draw those 5 cards, or I draw 3 of them and I put 2 of them in the graveyard. I attack the second time, and I'm basically with an empty library. So I guess that my fault was that I built the deck that couldn't. Oh no! I definitely like Nile with lower domain. I don't have to draw a card for it to be decent. I also can dig for my 5th land. I can dig for my actual threats, or something like that. So I'm super happy playing it with less. I'm just not unhappy for having 5 in this case. Omnath nods. Thinking back, maybe Pixie Illusionist has no decks with 0 green because the Pixie itself counts as green. No, I did it differently. I counted the. Ooh, that might be good. Yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe you figured it out. Maybe I did count Pixie as a source of green, and therefore it was 0. I have to double check it, but that's a very good point. It will also solve many problems in my graph building. The longer I think about it, the more likely that you are right, actually, in this particular case. Any interesting things here? Nope. I mean, Slimefoot surveys good numbers. That might be something that is a slight surprise. That's actually pretty decent win rate for what the card does, in my opinion. Okay, now we had our seminar. It was a bit shorter than normally, but still pretty lengthy, so that's fine. Next week, I'm going to dive deeper and try to get a bit more insights from the format, especially looking at the speed of the decks and impacts of cards on the speed of the deck. No. This is not. Oh, sorry. I'm just going to come back because I don't think that Dominiman was there when we discussed what this means. This is a 5-color deck, not a mono deck. This is a 5-color deck that has one source of the lowest count of the basics. So it has all 5 colors, and let's say there is only 1 swamp in it. This one has 2 of the lowest number of basics. but it all has 5 colors. So Voda Sea Scavenger is the best in 5 color decks, but not 5 color decks that have many sources of the lowest color, basically. So it's not like super 5 color deck. It's like a 5 color deck when you splash last couple of colors. You have sources for them, basic sources for them, but you don't have like too many of them. Hopefully that's clear. But yes, play Librarian instead. It's better. Okay, we go into the acknowledgements. As always, thanks to the 17 Lands team this week, especially because I know how much struggle and strive they went through in order to get the game data online, especially Viral Misnomer and Alibalini, the ZTM. They went really through hell to get this thing to work. I would also like to thank Fake Jake Brown, who is the secret Santa of the podcast version of Magic Numbers. And as we are on the podcast, we release it in the podcast form, and the podcast form has music from Asescu and Mana Junkie. So thanks to them for providing the theme for the podcast. And once again, I would like to thank my sponsor at mtgazone.com. And with that, I'll see you next week.